All right, Craig. So I sent you a copy of the interview questions I have for you. Did you get a chance to look at them a little bit?
I did a little bit, yeah.
Okay. So just want to make sure that you're comfortable with all these questions before I put you on the spot.
Yeah, they're fine.
All right, cool. Let's get started then. So, what is your vision for the ISECS chapter going forward in the UK?
So for the UK, I think, yeah, my intent is to attract as many UK-based firms, companies, individuals, and also European-based companies, bring them into the fold and educate them specifically on US export control policy and sanctions policy. Um, because I think there's um, some knowledge lacking out there in the international community as to what the rules and regulations are in the United States and how those apply internationally. So if I could achieve that here in the UK, that would be great.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree with you that there is probably, a lack of knowledge everywhere, probably.
Yeah,
I
or
mean, I don't,
limited knowledge, I
yeah,
would say. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, during your time in VAS, it seems that you spent a lot of time investigating nefarious companies and or trade activities. Would you say that's correct?
Yes.
Okay. What are some of the most common red flags you have seen for companies that may be conducting fraudulent activity?
The most common red flags. Well, I guess the way I would put that or describe it as an investigator is what red flags did I see that I think companies or whoever I was investigating, not just investigating, but what companies were missing. So the red flags
Mm,
that I saw that I think should have been seen.
mm,
Um, a lot, this is quite broad, but I would say the know your customer part
hmm.
of due diligence, I think it was surprising to me, um, the lack of due diligence that some companies would do, or things that they would miss that if they had just done a little bit of research would have picked up on. So, for example, um, locations, you
Hmm.
know, where are you sending your stuff to? You've been provided a location by a foreign entity. And when I would go out and do my investigation for, I would find, for example, an open field where there was nothing there but a gas station.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was the address provided. And
Wow.
so you don't have to physically go there to see that. You could do Google Earth as an example, and you would find that there's actually nothing there. Or it was a situation where a legitimate address was provided, but it wasn't what the company was telling. It wasn't what the foreign entity was telling the US company was there. So if they said, for example, my company is at this particular address, and you do a basic search and you find out that it's a McDonald's or it's a hair salon or it's
Yeah.
something other than what they said it was. So I was always kind of perplexed by that
Yeah.
how do you not even how do you not check that? I mean, that is the most basic of red flag identifiers you can find, and you can get there by just doing these simple searches. So without
Hmm.
going through kind of a laundry list of things, that was one that I would see over and over again. I was always quite surprised that US companies shipped their stuff to certain places.
Yeah, that's it seems like a very glaring red
Yeah,
flag.
You
But
would
maybe it's
think.
something that people just don't think of like right off the bat. I don't know.
Either don't think of it or just don't bother to do it,
Yeah.
or just are taking the customer's word for it. That okay, this is the address in Armenia. I don't know anything about Armenia, so I get it must be what they're saying it is. And oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
the nefarious actors obviously rarely give a legitimate address. So, um, yeah. So it could have been a
Okay.
combination of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a good red flag to look for then. And that's a good idea. Just looking it up on Google Maps could
Yep.
easily, show
Yeah.
you whether or not that's suspicious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Um, so number three, are you able to briefly list what companies can do to proactively pursue compliance and successfully conduct trade with the United States? And I did add that, I didn't want you to feel like you had to go through a laundry
Right.
list of it, but if anything, simple came to mind, that would be helpful, would be cool to hear about.
Yeah, again, I think I would go back to how I just answered the previous question. Um, you got to know your customer, and
Mm-hmm,
you've got to ask questions of your customers and your distributors and your freight forwarders and whoever it is in the supply chain you're dealing with. You've got to ask all the relevant questions. Where are you
mm-hmm,
located? What's your email address? If they provide an email address that doesn't seem right, that could be a red flag.
mm-hmm,
You know, what is your business model? What exactly is it that you do? The other thing too that I always would recommend to companies, especially with new clients or new customers, is have them sign an end user certificate. It's not required by law unless specified, for example, with a license. Uh, but generally speaking, it's not a requirement. But why not get that end user certificate signed so that at least you've got documented what it is the customers, where they're saying the stuff is going. Um,
mm-hmm,
Ask that question. And if the answer is, I don't want to sign it or I refuse to sign it, that should raise a red flag. That should cause
mm-hmm,
you some concern, um, because there's a reason they don't want to sign it,
mm-hmm,
generally. So these are the types of, things that I think companies should be doing if you want to do business with the United States. Um, you've got to know your customer, you've got to know who your distributors are, you have to know who your distributors are dealing with. Um, what we're running into now from time to time is the big company, the manufacturer has several distributors, and some of the distributors are reputable distributors and their products are going to these distributors, and then the distributors are selling them to other people, other distributors or general trading companies, or directly to the customer. But that distributor or that freight forwarder, they don't necessarily have a great compliance program. They're not asking the right questions, and so what ends up happening is the manufacturer's products are ending up where they're not supposed to. And so the manufacturer needs to be holding their distributors accountable, when dealing with their products. And so they should be reviewing their distributors' compliance programs, or at least asking, do you have a compliance program? How intense is it? How complete is it? Is it basic? Is it, detailed? What gaps are you missing? So, if companies would do this on a regular basis for all of their customers, and again, especially new clients that they may not have dealt with before, asking these questions. Some of them may be uncomfortable to ask or feel like they're difficult to ask, but they've got to be asked.
mm-hmm.
Um, that's really the best way to mitigate your risk.
Awesome. That was some really good information. Thank you so much for sharing. Um,
Yep.
and then number four, are there any pivotal moments in your career that you could possibly discuss with us? Perhaps anything that affected you in a poignant way and like that led you to dedicate your career to federal service, maybe even specifically when it comes to trade?
Well, there's two, I guess, two different, I guess, questions in that one big question. I mean, my attraction to government service in general
Hmm.
started years ago when I was younger. I had this innate desire to want to uh, do some sort of service for the country, really.
Hmm.
So then it was just a matter of how I did that, where I did that. And so I started out in the military and then I graduated into law enforcement. And so, um, but that desire, started way back when I was young. In terms of um, pivotal moments in my career, there's probably a few, but in recent years,
Hmm.
um, honestly, it was the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And not just because, I was with BIS at the time, I've served with other government agencies, uh, but when the invasion of Ukraine happened, it was the first time in a very long time where I the result, saw the impact, I should say, saw the impact of
Hmm.
my job and what we do at BIS. And overnight, and I was serving in Turkey at the time the invasion happened. And I tell people this all the time. Overnight, I became the most important person at the US consulate because all of these export controls and sanctions went into place pretty quickly. And, um, the ambassador, the consulate general, and others were scrambling to figure out what it all meant, and I was the person that knew what it meant. And so I found myself on multiple occasions in high level briefings with the US ambassador, with the consulate general, with people from the State Department, briefing other countries. At one point in time, at the US Embassy in Ankara, I briefed, I think it was 21 or 28 different allied countries that all came to the embassy to get a briefing on U.S. export controls and sanctions against Russia. And so, yeah, that was a very memorable point in my career. I think in part because it's the most recent one, but I really got to see the fruits of my labor, if you will. The work I was doing, it mattered. It made an impact. I saw things change for the positive. Um, and so that was great. And so that I would pinpoint that point in time.
Absolutely. I can imagine that was a crazy experience for you and
Yeah,
everybody involved.
it was. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Moving on to question five. Are you able to explain in simple terms for the audience what exactly BIS is and what they do for the United States?
Great question because a lot of people have that question. I think the way I explain it to people when they ask, what do you do? So the Bureau of Industry and Security is the regulatory and enforcement body for the US Department of Commerce. That's essentially what we are. We
Mm-hmm.
are the law enforcement arm of the United States Department of Commerce. And
Mm-hmm.
our job is to protect the economic interests and the national security interests of the United States by regulating and monitoring where our most sensitive products are exported, who they go to, and what they're being used for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in simplest terms, that's what BIS does.
Right.
And quite frankly, before I became a BIS agent, prior to that, I was a DEA agent. So everybody knows who DEA is. Most people know it from TV shows like Breaking Bad and Narcos, but
Yeah.
um, nobody really knows what BIS is. I didn't either. And, I found out through a friend. And once I got the job and started working cases, you learn more. Um, and that is kind of what I figured out. Everything we did was to protect the national security and economic interests of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and our allies, quite frankly. So, yeah, that's the best way to describe it in
Yeah,
my
I think
my
that's
simple terms.
yeah, I definitely think that's a great way to describe it. And I do think it's important that people are more aware of that.
Yeah. And I
So
mean,
I'm glad that
there's different components to it as well, right? There's the trade
sure.
component, there's
Mm-hmm.
the enforcement component, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also the intelligence side of things. In my previous life when I was a DEA agent, at least when I was a street agent in New York, I wasn't getting a lot of intelligence briefings, let's say. Um, but when I came to BIS, that was really my first introduction to the intelligence world, and seeing how um, the intelligence side of the U.S. government, how it's so important and how it really impacts everything else that we do in government, and
Mm-hmm.
it has a direct impact on the enforcement of export controls and sanctions. So I got, pretty good insight into that. And so that was pretty neat for me, having not
Yeah,
done it before. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have some idea of it, just because I have family that have been inside of it. But it's a good question, and I'm glad that you went into it for people who have no, insight into it at all. So
Right.
thank you. So number 6, what is your advice for newcomers in the exports, controls, and sanctions field?
Um, for newcomers,
Mm-hmm.
I would say for both industry folks that are new to this world and government folks that come into this world, I would say the best advice would be get ready to get ready to learn and be prepared to constantly be learning
Mm-hmm.
about export controls and sanctions because it's complicated, it's complex. The rules sometimes, I mean, they're very complex and they're hard to
Mm-hmm.
understand sometimes. They're hard to interpret.
Absolutely.
Um, so be prepared to learn, be ready to learn. And they're also the rules and regulations are always changing as well. And it
Mm-hmm.
really depends on, they change a lot based on what's happening in the world today. But tomorrow, the world, something else, some other crisis may happen somewhere that then forces the US government to pivot in that direction. And then export controls and sanctions changes with it. And
Mm-hmm.
so some rules and regulations become, obsolete, but then new ones are put into place. And a lot of things happen very quickly and they happen overnight. And so for those that are in industry, and also on the enforcement side or on the government side, you have to be nimble when it comes to change because things are always changing.
Oh
And
gosh, yeah.
yeah, new rules come out all the time. And again, because things are happening in the world all the time, good and
Mm-hmm.
bad. And so,
Yeah.
and oftentimes it's anyone's guess what you're going to wake up to tomorrow morning. And so that would be my best advice. Be ready to learn. Um, be prepared to be flexible, be able to shift quickly, um, because it's a world, the whole export control and sanctions world changes all the time.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And yeah, that's a common thing I hear from each of these interviews that I do. I always like to ask that question, from the different perspectives that everybody has coming into this field, whether it's industry, academic, or, government like you. So, that's
yeah,
a consistent thing I hear is that it's
yeah,
complicated.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, when I was a DEA agent, things changed. Yes, new rules were implemented, but heroin was always illegal. Like,
Yeah.
there's not going to be much change there. If you're selling heroin, you're going to be arrested and go to jail. That's just the way it is. Like, we're not going to
Yeah.
legalize that. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Um, but some of these export control laws, I mean, just the EAR in and of itself is so complex and complicated at times and hard to interpret. And so you really do have to kind of bear down and, peel back the layers to really get the answer that you need. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
For sure. Well, thank you for all this great, perspective and info. I like to end these interviews off now on a
yeah.
little bit more of a more lighthearted note. So, what's your favorite ice cream and
Favorite
why?
ice cream? That's a great question.
Yeah,
I always liked, since I was a kid, mint chocolate chip. That
that's a
green ice
solid
cream
one.
with
Hmm.
chocolate chips in it. Yeah, so
That's a good
that's
one.
yeah, that's a staple for me. So whenever
Hmm.
I'm out and I see it, I get it.
Waffle or cup?
Cone, waffle cone. I like cones. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Craig. I'll end the recording now, and it was
Okay.
awesome to get to talk to you about stuff.
No problem. So that's it. You don't that's all you need from me?
Oh yeah. Unless you have anything else that you would like to,
No.
impress upon the readers or anything.
No.
I'm trying to keep these interviews pretty succinct for people and
No, I think that
user
was good.
friendly.
I think we
Yeah.
covered it. I think we covered all of it. So all right. Yeah, that was great. I appreciate it. And yeah, it was good to see the Ajesha, Jordan. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, not a problem.
Okay.
So
I'll see
stop
you guys
recording.